Okay, let's get started. All right, well, I'm very excited to be here today, and I hope we're all doing well. But before we kick things off officially, I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you for everybody for joining us, and a big special mention to Ellen and Adele from the Novati team for organizing this. So hi everybody, and welcome to Novati's webinar on how businesses can navigate through their world of data privacy, from compliance to customer experience. My name is Cian Jackson. I'm the General Manager for Merchant Acquiring, and joining us on the panel today, we've got 4 privacy experts with legal, compliance, payments, and cybersecurity background. So we've got the dream team, cream of the crop. We're going to have a good, very interesting webinar today. So first up, we've got Dave Landis. He's a partner at Climb. He joins us all the way from the US. Climb is a Novati partner that offers a consent and accessibility management platform that allows users to manage consent, data privacy documents, and data subject requests. So thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Rob Pullum. So he's Senior Counsel at K&L Gates, and Rob has an IT background and has worked for many large corporations in technology, energy, utilities, health funds, you name it. He's done it, it sounds like, by leading, organizational privacy reviews and also representing various privacy and cybersecurity issues. So welcome, Rob. And joining Rob from, great to have you here. Joining Rob is Stephanie Mayhew. So she's a privacy lawyer at K&L Gates as well. Steph has previously worked in the Privacy Commission in New South Wales and at the Australian Information Commissioner. So privacy is her forte. So welcome, Steph. And then joining us, joining myself at Novati, we've got George Abraham. He's our Chief Information Security Officer. And George is a resident cybersecurity expert responsible for developing and implementing an enterprise-wide information security program at Novati. So welcome, George.
Thank you, Cian.
So I'm Cian Jackson, General Manager for Payments Acceptance at Novati. My team and I work with SMBs and corporates, from all over Australia and New Zealand to enable them to accept payments online and face-to-face. And we actually speak to merchants daily, our businesses daily, and it seems to be a growing concern around privacy and what businesses should do. So we always have those conversations around payments, but once after a while we start to talk about other things in the that's currently happening. And this is where I suppose it'd be good to to dive into the privacy landscape at the moment. And over the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen privacy become a lot more of a pressing issue, and that's due to a lot of high-profile data breaches. And then you get the media security that kind of follows that. So consumers are a lot more concerned about how businesses actually use their information. And then from a business point of view, we've got business owners who are concentrated about how they store customer data, what they should be doing with it, and then their overall cybersecurity strategies. So let's go around the table here, and I'd love to hear a bit of an overview from the privacy landscape, over the last few years, and what we're doing, where we're going as a country. Maybe Rob and Steph, you can kick off.
Thanks, Cian. And definitely from the privacy regulatory perspective, things are changing rapidly. What we're seeing in Australia and around the world. 2 key areas for us over the last 8 or 10 months have been privacy reform in Australia. We've seen significantly increased penalties and many proposals for reform to our Act, and a changing environment based on recent high-profile data breaches starting around September last year, affecting millions of Australians each, which has really pushed a lot of consumer and regulatory sentiment in this area. So to briefly unpack that a little, what we saw was in December last year, the penalties rise by about 25 times in Australia. The maximum penalty for a privacy breach is around 50 million, in line with our consumer law penalties as well. It was 2 million before that in December, so there's a huge change there. And we've also got a big reform project to the key Australian privacy legislation, which is the Privacy Act. Nice, easy to remember name. And under that, there are 13 rules in the schedule known as the Australian Privacy Principles. Previously, they haven't, largely they haven't applied to small businesses. Anyone turning over more than 3 million has an exemption, except depending on what kind of information you do deal with. But as I said, largely it's not been something that small business has had to worry about. That's going to change, but not before there's more consultation and support or tools being developed for small businesses. And we expect to see, the timeline's a little bit grey, but we expect to see that happen probably in the next 6 to 12 months. And also with the data breaches, what we're seeing is a much more active regulator. Currently, we've got the Information Commissioner who also handles Privacy Commissioner functions. The new budget has allocated a separate standalone Privacy Commissioner to come back. So there's going to be some more focus on there. And we've heard a lot recently, the Privacy Commissioner say, based on those recent breaches, that there's a really key expectation that businesses are only collecting information they need. They're only keeping it for as long as they need to keep it, and they're securing it during all of those times. That's a quick overview of the legislative landscape at the moment, Ken.
Thanks, Rob. It's there's a lot happening. What about anything from yourself, Steph, to add in there?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much everything going on. And with the small business exemption removal that's in the Privacy Act review report, we understand that there will be a lot of consultation with small businesses. So it's not going to be something that's just going to come into effect straight away and they're going to bombard the small businesses and say, here, you've got to be compliant straight away. So they will work with the small businesses to make sure that that compliance can happen in a way that small businesses can manage. So we'll know more about that in the coming months because consultation closed in March. So we will expect to see that soon.
Yeah, because it does feel like the larger corporates or larger businesses are a bit ahead of the game. They can understand. They might have their own legal, they might have their own privacy, departments. So it, I think probably comes back to the smaller businesses which will want to play catch up.
For sure.
And George, in the cybersecurity space, it's been an interesting few 6 to 12 months. Do you want to go through what that's going to look like?
Thank you, Kian. From a cybersecurity perspective, the last 12 months were really very tough. There was a lot of bad news. And I think it's safe to say that I aged really bad in the last 12 months.
You get a few gray hairs, all right.
Yeah. If you look at the 3 big breaches that have happened in the past 8 months, the number of records that were impacted is close to 25 million records. And that is a large number. And these are mostly Australian records. For a country like Australia, this number is just too big. That is the bad news. But the good news that has come out of all this is the increase in awareness when it comes to cybersecurity and privacy. So now it's a talking point. There's a lot of people speaking about security and privacy when people give the information. Earlier, people used to give information very, very easily. And now there's that questioning, hey, do you really need this information? What are you using this information for? That's one good thing that's come out of it. And the other good thing that's come out of these breaches is the support from the government. In the last federal budget, the government has committed to $23 million to support small and medium-sized businesses to train cyber wardens. Yeah, we didn't have any initiative like this before, and this is excellent news for small companies. Also, the government has committed to $86 million to start a national anti-scam center. So there's a lot happening from the government to support security and privacy, which is excellent news. Also, the last point to add is in November, last November, the government has set up a Hack the Hacker Center with ASD trained professionals. And I haven't heard too much about it, but to me, this is approaching the war game situation, right? We have external entities trying to hack us, and now the government is hacking back. So it's all good news that's come out of these incidents. I'm very positive. Over to you, Keen.
Was a cyber warden. First time I heard one of those. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah.
How do you sign up to be a cyber warden, George?
Cyber.gov.au. Go onto the website and off you go.
Okay, watch out. We got a few upcoming cyber wardens coming through this year, I reckon.
Indeed.
Dave, we last but not least, what's your view on the changing landscape for privacy in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ken. The interesting thing here is that consumers are continually hearing about private data being shared, whether it's like media companies, brands, both big and small, and the like. And as George said, the attention on privacy has never been more than it is today. And as you fast forward, consumers are sometimes, I want to be sure to stress that, sometimes are being presented with options to give consent, give partial consent, or moreover, revoke consent when it comes to sharing their personal data with the business in question, the website. Data has to do with their gender, their location, their age range, shopping habits, preferences, path they took to make the purchase, and the like. These are all areas of focus when it comes to having, frankly, more control from a consumer perspective. And what's interesting about this is studies have shown, in Australia specifically, that 85% of consumers, they want to have more control and feel that it's a human right to have more control of what's being shared and what's not being shared about their personal information. And again, in Australia specifically, recent studies show that only 21% of consumers believe that they have a strong understanding of privacy. So as George said, there's a lot of attention around privacy. Only 21% actually truly understand what it is, what it does, what it means, what they're trying to accomplish through all of these things they're doing today to make it better. And it's because that lack of understanding of only 21%, when the consumers presented, only 80% of those consumers actually opted out, or actually over 80% of those consumers opted out of sharing their personal information because they just don't know, right? They don't always know what they're opting out, opting in, and such. And speaking of opting in or opting out, I wanted to jump into some of the global laws, just regulation-wise, as Australia continues to mold and kind of craft what theirs looks like over the next, as George said, over the next 6 to 12 months. We'll touch upon GDPR, some of the states, PDEA in Canada, just so kind of you can see what the landscape will start to shape, or how it will start to shape. And we have GDPR, which stands for, if you don't know already, General Data Protection Legislation, and it's a European law, European Union, that came into effect in May. So they are way ahead of the curve in regards to protecting consumers and protecting that private information. And in short, GDPR governs the way businesses can actually use, process, and store that personal data. So when they use it, can they share it, can they trade it, can they sell it, etc. And then more importantly, how they actually store that data to protect the consumer. And with that, the consumer has to have the right to actually opt in or opt out. With the PDEA, for a Canadian aspect of things, which means Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, which is federal, and it was a federal law around private sector organizations throughout the country. Then the goal was to set the ground kind of framework around how businesses must handle information, much like GDPR, and how they can use it commercially. So can they sell it? Can they use it? Can they use it to market to the consumer, et cetera? There are many other laws around the globe, whether it's Brazil, many other countries, but we'll touch upon the states because there's actually laws that are going to pass each state. Unfortunately, America doesn't have a federal law, but they have a state-by-state law. And one that's in practice today, and one that's closest to GDPR, is California, because they have the strictest rules around consumer data. And CPRA, or more specifically, the California Privacy Rights Act, is a statewide data privacy law that empowers Californian residents with the right to opt out of these data sales or data trades or data capture, and the right to be informed of their data collection. So the business actually had to tell the consumer that the data is actually being collected. And the cool part is actually the consumer has the right to actually append the data, request the data to be deleted, update the data if they choose to do so, and the right to delete it. And what's interesting and most important about all these laws that I just mentioned, and most privacy laws globally, is that you don't have to be do business, or you don't have to be a business in that country. For example, you can be in a business in Australia, that's your location, that's where you're out of, but you're providing products to California residents, and you're then required to follow California consumer privacy laws, in this case, CPRA. So within this in mind, my hope is that you're thinking about how your business is presenting the options to your customers, giving them the right to, or giving them the option to opt out, opt in. But with location regulatory laws, we'll touch upon that a little bit later and how that framework works.
Thanks, Dave. I think splitting this into kind of two areas, you've got two major factors when it comes to data privacy management. You got the compliance side, obviously, which is where all businesses must comply, and then you got the customer side where you really need to start meeting expectations when it comes to privacy. You gotta blend your products and services into this kind of situation as well, and then pretty much all this leads to consumer or customer trust, because that seems to be a pretty big issue at the moment, especially in Australia. So I'll pose a question back to the group here, and it's going to be why and how can data privacy management be used to build customer trust? And I feel like, from an Australian point of view, we're going to have to build it back up. So Dave, do you want to go back into that one?
Yeah, I'll jump right back in there. Let's begin the reality of online consumer privacy. First and foremost, studies continue to show that consumers are concerned, they're confused, and they have a general feeling that they've lost control of their personal information being tracked. In many cases, they think all of their activities are being tracked online, without the power to change it, or even if they do change it. Further studies have shown that the high percentage of consumers think that personal data itself is so lost and not even being stored correctly, and not being secured properly. So circling back, to your question, Kian, is, how can data privacy management change the consumer sentiment and build consumer trust, which, frankly, as a business, are two things that are most important: trust and transparency. You buy from people that you trust, you buy from people that you've had experience with, and you buy from people that, have transparency, in this case, around data and how it's being used. So I read something recently that it was really around, the do's and don'ts around diminishing and gaining consumer trust. And this was an interesting one, because I'll start with, how do you diminish trust from a consumer perspective when they're buying? And that's when a company uses their data to offer them products and services from another organization, right? And so, and I'll use this as an example. I swear to goodness, our phone listens to us sometimes, because I'll be talking about a product, and then all of a sudden I'll have something in my email box, right? When a company requests information from them without clarifying why is it needed. So like during the checkout process, or when, despite of losing their personal data, a company says it will fix things moving forward. So those are things of like what diminishes that consumer trust. But I want to spend more time on three items that has proven to enhance consumer trust, especially around consumer privacy. And that's when a company allows them to opt in, rather than just being opt-in by default. Right? That's why laws are being passed globally, because that's always been the norm of, hey, because you're on my website, you're being opted in. Or more specifically, having something on their site saying, we're tracking your cookies. You have no other option other than, if you want to buy from them, press yes. Right? And if you don't press yes, it's going to track it anyways, because that's the default. The second is when a company has a clear privacy information that enables them to understand how it processes their personal data. Doesn't have to be right there, glaring right there on the website, but if they ever chose to go to the privacy policy or the data privacy aspect of their website, it's very clear and concise. And lastly, and this was actually most important from every study I ever read, or I've ever read to date, when the company in question, the website in question, gives them complete control of their personal information. And what I mean by that is kind of, as I mentioned, is their personal information, they have the ability to update it, opt out, opt in. You're giving them control. And frankly, that's really what laws have happened. You've gone through around the globe from a regulatory perspective and just made it mandatory. And it'll continue to kind of snowball down. But these are the things that even when there's no law in place today, it's a lot of companies are getting ahead of that curve, because when a consumer comes and looks at a product, one company gives me access, the other does not. Studies have shown they go to the one that gives them access. So the risk of losing revenue, losing business because of the lack of control from the consumer perspective is real.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it's certainly starting to feel like a balancing act, all right. Rob and Steph, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, so that survey Dave was just speaking about, I am familiar with that. And it's interesting because about 74% of those surveyed in that study have deleted an app, because from their phone, 73% have stopped using a particular website, 65% decided against an online purchase because of these concerns. So it really is important to build consumer trust. And the only way that you're going to do that is through compliance. And we know that businesses can get scared by that word, and it's not always fun to engage in compliance, but sometimes it's not as hard as you might think. And it's just, with privacy, it can be as simple as just implementing a clear privacy policy that states what you're doing with people's personal information, that's clear, that tells them in very clear language what you're doing with it, your personal information handling practices, and consumers will be responsive to that. That's what they want to know. And now with this, all the high profile data breaches, consumers are becoming more scared and aware of these things happening to them. So they're looking for that, and the media is really playing it up. So yeah, having a clear privacy policy and ensuring you're providing the appropriate notices to your consumers about why you're collecting their information and what you're going to do with that information is really important, and it's going to ensure that they continue to engage with you. And yeah, we really see the biggest loss of trust when organizations do have a data breach. But in that same study, 40% of consumers, they stayed loyal to the company that had a data breach because of the way that they handled the data breach after it happened. So that really shows how important it is to be prepared for a data breach and how you're going to deal with that data breach after it happens. Because, it's inevitable sometimes. It doesn't matter how secure your systems are or everything that you might put in place to mitigate a data breach from happening. It still may happen to you. It's how you deal with it. And that's how, individuals and consumers are going to care what they're going to care about in the end. And yeah, also with marketing, if you're spamming them, not giving them a way to opt out, if you're sending them marketing communications after they've opted out, that you're going to lose their trust. And so it's really important that you're ensuring your marketing teams are privacy aware, that they're trained appropriately, that they know what they're doing. We see a lot of mistakes happen within the marketing teams. So yeah, making sure they're equipped to deal with that. Also just disclosing information to third parties and you haven't told the individuals that you're going to be doing that. So yeah, that all comes back to putting it in your privacy policy, putting it in the collection statement that you're providing them, and even things like forwarding an email to the wrong recipient, and it includes sensitive information. So there's all these ways that you can mitigate those things from happening. And an interesting recent case that you may or may not be aware of is the 7-Eleven case. Basically, 7-Eleven had these customer survey pods in their store, And it basically was a screen that had smiley faces from like a sad face to a really, really happy face. And they wanted their customers to click on the face to say how happy they were with the service provided in store. And what was happening, 7-Eleven were biometrically checking every person's face with the camera. And 7-Eleven said they were doing this because they wanted to infer the information about the customer's approximate age and the gender, and to detect whether the same person was leaving multiple survey responses within a 20-hour period, so they could exclude multiple surveys from the survey results. And there were two main issues with this. One was whether they were notifying the customers that they were doing this, which they weren't. And biometric information is really, really sensitive information, and you need express consent to collect it. And then the second issue was whether 7-Eleven actually needed to collect this information to achieve their legitimate functions or activities. Did they really need to collect their facial prints, you know, to see if they were satisfied with their in-store service? As a result, you know, the OIC didn't agree with their arguments, and they had to cease collecting all those facial prints and destroy all the images they had collected. So yeah, I personally don't go near those machines. You'll see them now. I've said it, and you'll see them around. They're in airport terminals. They're around, and you know, they kind of scare me. I don't want my facial print being stored. And you know, some other organizations probably don't do that, but just because that's happened, it's kind of diminished my trust in 7-Eleven and also in other organizations. So yeah, it's just an interesting example of needing to be transparent with your consumers.
You're scaring me, Steph. You're scaring me.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
I'll never go to an airport again.
Yeah.
I'll just drive. But it is pretty interesting, right? That, you know, there's obviously extremes where some business will take it to a different level, and but I think, you know, people are cotton on to, you know, what's happened over the last 6 to 12 months and what information they're giving over. And especially, I'm sure there's people on this webinar that have been actually impacted by the data breaches in Australia. So, you know, or you would know somebody who was impacted. So I think, you know, having that mindset going into purchase or anything to do with, you know, handing over your own personal information, I think that's going to be questioned, you know, going forward. Rob, do you have anything to add to that, or will I move on to some practical steps? Because I think now is pretty a good time to maybe move into a bit of a takeaway from this, because it's you know, I think it's been pretty interesting to kind of to understand and hear from different sides of the world to start off with, but of privacy and the landscape as well. But let's go into maybe some practical steps, some takeaways, what a business can what kind of value a business can take from this webinar. George, you're foaming at the mouth to jump on this. I think you always love to talk about cybersecurity. So maybe we'll start with George on cybersecurity. Give us some takeaways, George. What should we do?
Thank you, Kian. So the first thing any organization can do to limit the extent of a breach is to reduce the amount of data that they store. Okay, and I've seen this in many organizations. When it comes to storing data, it is a hoarder's mentality that I see. You know, you don't need this data, but you still want it. You have terabytes of data sitting there that is absolutely useless, but organizations are very reluctant to delete data, and that's just making you a more attractive target. So the first practical tip I have for any organization is, if you don't require the data, delete it securely, and delete it just not from your production systems, also delete it from your backups, which are all attractive areas for hackers. The Australian government has published a framework called the Essential 8. It is 8 mitigation strategies to make cybersecurity breaches very difficult to happen. So it's not a guarantee, that an organization will never get hacked. It just makes a cybersecurity breach unlikely, and it makes the organization very difficult to hack. If you go on to the cyber.gov.au website, there are a list of strategies. These 8 strategies are clearly listed with practical tips on how to secure your environment. So that's my practical suggestions and tips to keep your data and your organization safe.
Thanks, George. What about Steph and Rob?
I just got to say, I cannot walk past one of those smiley face machines without turning my back these days. But no, absolutely. George's tips have really highlighted the things the Commissioner has been saying over and over again for the last 6 months, and that is, know what data you're collecting, limit that to what you need to collect, and know what data you're holding, and don't keep it for longer than that's needed. And it really is that holders mentality. If it is necessary for you to be keeping data, some of the other things we've seen to reduce the impacts of a data breach are if you're not accessing that data regularly or day to day, but you've got to keep it also for compliance reasons, then think about storing that offline or encrypting it so that if your network does get accessed by a hacker, they can't easily do something with that information. But coming back to, I think, compliance and practical tips around compliance, we know, small businesses don't have the same resources big business does. So you might not be able to tip thousands into compliance in Australia, and then compliance in Europe if you're dealing with Europe, compliance in the UK, given they're separating due to Brexit from the same privacy laws as Europe. They'll have similarities, but they'll start to diverge, or compliance with the US. And so it becomes a lot harder to compete in the terms of dollar for dollar spend in that compliance space unless you find kind of easy, cheap, effective tools to be able to help you with that. You can sign up to the Privacy Commissioner, the IAIC's website, and they do regular emails so they can keep you posted. You can find out when they are thinking about further consultation with small business, or when the reforms are going to start to bite. You can sign up to blogs like the one that Steph and I run, keeping up to date with changes in that area. And I think they're kind of some of the simple ways just to stay across the quickly changing regulatory environment in Australia, and keeping an ear to the ground, I think.
Awesome, thanks. We've got a few questions coming in, but we'll go to Dave before we get into the questions, and we'll finish off with some Q&A. So Dave, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up really briefly. It's, as Steph mentioned as well, it's have a clear and concise privacy policy for they can refer to it, they being the consumer, and giving the consumer the right to opt out or opt in once you decide what data is critical and what's not critical, what you need to keep, what you don't need to keep, and so forth. I think giving that piece of it is going to build the most trust for your merchants, and with your merchants, that will keep your merchants and keep them buying from you as a business. And then just really quickly about myself and the partnership between Novati and Climb. We're in the business of supporting building consumer trust for your customers, for our customers. Right? And we do this globally. And we do this for our customers and businesses like yours, providing a easily deployed solution that covers all principles that we mentioned today of concise privacy policies, making sure that they opt in or opt out and they have the ability to do so, but also making it and I don't always like referring to it this way, but a set it, forget it solution, because we manage all laws globally. If something comes up and changes, we update our system. So those that don't have, as Kian mentioned and others mentioned, that if they don't have privacy officers on staff, they don't have fully accessible consultants, that creates havoc and challenges for SMBs alike. And that's where we come in with Novati and help support Novati's partners to make sure they continually, and we facilitate compliance globally for them.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. That's a lot to take away. But let's go into some of the questions, because we've got some questions rolling in at the moment. Let's start off with this one here. So, when do we move to self-sovereign digital ID? Why do companies brackets blanks telcos and utilities need to retain? Why do those companies like banks, utilities, and telcos need to retain so much private and personal data once a customer has been verified? So this probably could go to maybe Steph or Rob. Sorry, a bird just flew into my window. It was a bit weird, but Rob or Steph, do you want to jump on that one?
Sure, Steph, I'm happy for you to take this. I can jump back in.
Yeah, sure. So could be a requirement by law. Retention laws could require them to keep the data for a certain period of time. Financial records are usually about 7 years. After that, then they're probably going to need to reconsider and revisit why they're still holding it. But that's usually the reason when it's financial or ID verification type data. Rob, do you have any further?
Yeah, and it could be AML, CTF kind of compliance requirements as well. But one of the things that we saw very quickly, I think the media pick up on with the data breaches last year was identity documents like passports being held for 10 years after someone had joined as a customer, and even when they weren't a customer anymore. So that the technical solution, I've heard it particularly in the open banking and CDR context, of having simply a way for businesses to confirm that they are talking with the right person and they're not needing themselves to retain all that information. I think you need a bit of legislative backing so that we don't have competing technologies and wasted resources looking at a lot of those things. But it certainly is, I think it would solve a few of those retention issues if there was a more central way of doing it. But then it can increase the risks of one party holding the honeypot of all of that identity information as well. So it's a challenging one.
Thanks, Rob and Steph. I got another one actually that is pretty interesting, and it's related to the 7-Eleven case. What do you think about Woolworths recording you when you check out, and they look at your face from the top of your head? What do you think about that one? It does feel a bit similar to 7-Eleven, but there's obviously a camera on you when you're shopping. I think that's in some stores, not everyone.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this to Rob, I think a couple of weeks ago that they were starting to implement that into stores, and it's like this camera at the self-checkout. And I would think that their reasoning for that would be theft prevention. But again, I didn't see any notices around the store about that. That's really my only comments on that. I haven't seen it being investigated or brought up in the media, but I might have missed that. But yeah, I did mention it to Rob a couple of weeks ago actually, that I thought that was quite weird, especially with the Good Guys Kmart case that's going on, which was a similar, along the same lines, where they were recording keeping people's facial prints for theft prevention and not providing notice of that in store. So yeah, it could be kind of a similar issue there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how that one plays out, especially when a lot of people already asking questions about it. Just last but not least, I think we're kind of struggling a bit for time, but there's another question that's coming here for, it looks like, Dave. So how easy is it to deploy a platform like Climb? And do I need to do it now, or do I need to put it in when privacy legislation comes in?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part of the question first. Most businesses that I work with globally are doing it prior to legislation going in, as it goes through, just to get ahead of the curve, right? Because that way it's not a frantic race to be compliant, and they get in, it's done, and they get to move forward. In regards to the ease of it, depends on the type of website builder, but if it's a standard one like GoDaddy or Wix or WordPress or anything like that, we have plugins that literally are a couple clicks of the button, and if you want to make some customizations, you can do so. If it's a homegrown site that was built, it's 11 lines of code that you cut and paste into your site. It's that easy.
Very easy. Sounds very easy. Well, look, that's a wrap. We're out of time. I just want to say thank you to all our speakers for sharing all their very interesting insights. Big thank you for everybody who joined us today. And we're going to email you a recording of the webinar, and we'll send some other information about all the other topics that we spoke about today as well. So you'll also find us on the YouTube channel, Novati's YouTube channel, and any other kind of previous webinars. So a big thank you to everybody joining us, everybody on the webinar, and have a great day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.